Hi, my name is Madeline Johnson, and I am a fourth grade teacher in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. In this, I am going to speak about tracking and the pros and cons and the different viewpoints. The information that I found, I really found two different definitions of tracking. I think the term that is used nowadays or in the present is ability grouping. And I specifically think ability grouping is used in the elementary schools more so than in the secondary schools, so middle school and high school. And so I think if I head towards that reason, that's where most of my background is, obviously, because I'm an elementary school teacher. It's that the ability grouping is grouping kids based on their ability, based on tests that the teacher does within the classroom. And they group these students based on those, and then they teach to the needs of the students. From my experience, most of ability grouping in the school that I teach in is taught during reading time, which we call guided reading groups. The kids are tested using a benchmark test through our reading curriculum, and 3 times a year, at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the year, to see their growth. And we teach these students using texts that are at their level, but we teach to the Nebraska state standards. So no matter what level they're at, they're still being taught the Nebraska state standards, but it's at a text that is at their level. So in this aspect, I believe, and there are other supporters that think that we are not leaving anyone behind, whether it be the lower kids or the higher kids, because if they are higher, we are using texts that are at their high level and pushing their thinking even more. And if they're lower, we are also using texts that are at their level and not necessarily. They probably aren't getting the deeper level thinking conversations going, but they're learning the basics of what they need to learn based on our standards. So in this, I see that it's a good thing. I think it would be hard to teach whole class and to teach the same text. Now, that being said, we do have our reading curriculum does have a shared reading piece, which is we are teaching, we are using a text that is at grade level for the whole class. And it's only 15 minutes a day, 15 to 20 minutes, and we're using focuses and, again, the Nebraska state standards. So tracking or ability grouping in that sense, I think, doesn't harm kids. But to play devil's advocate, I do understand that kids know. They know what level they're at. They know if they're high or if they're low. But from what I see as a fourth grade teacher, I think that's just kind of the norm these days. And I don't know if that's the right word to use, but the kids know. And I think sometimes it makes my lower kids try harder. To get higher doesn't mean that they're not trying. It just means that they want to be on grade level. And as fourth graders, they know. And so we set goals together. And I think I use it in a positive way rather than, oh, you're way below grade level, you need to fix it. I use it, okay, so where do we want to be? Where do you see yourself? And we use it to set goals. As far as other subjects go, we don't use tracking in our school at all, or we don't use departmentalization where we have kids that go in, one class. An example, our fifth grade teachers at the beginning of the year decided to departmentalize, so they switched for science, they switched for math, and they switched for writing. And they did departmentalize, so they did track these kids or ability group them as a whole class. So they would send the lowers with the lower, middle, and then they had the upper. And the kids did know that. Now, it did not work. So they went back to just using the classrooms. Part of the reason it didn't work is because the low kids, a lot of those lower kids have the behavior problem. So the teachers were having classroom management issues. Another problem was that the higher kids were kind of becoming the elitists and thinking they were better than the other two groups of kids. And another part is that the lower kids weren't having any, no one was stepping up to be leaders. And so they were having trouble with getting those conversations going and the role models out of their peers. And so I think now the second semester, or I think it happened around December, they decided to switch back where they just had their normal classrooms, mixed levels, and they still switch, but they're not switching, they're not ability grouping these kids, and I think it's working out better because the low kids are now hearing the answers from the higher kids, and they're hearing those conversations, and they're able to discuss with your peers. The behaviors are not quite as bad as they were with all the low kids. So in that aspect, the tracking or the ability grouping whole classes did not work. Ability grouping within classes, I think it does work. And that's been proven with the small guided reading groups. Now, on the other hand, that word tracking that we hear about, that used to be, years ago, you were tracked into classes based on your race, based on your gender. If you were a certain race, you went vocational. If you were gender, you probably went, females went to the teaching, went to the homemaker classes. Males went to the math and the science. I think that has a bad name to it. And I think the tracking more so is a con in the high school level because some articles that I was reading up on said that, these kids that are in these lower math classes can't ever really get into the higher ones because once they succeed in this, they have to then take this because there are prerequisite courses. And so I see the point in that once these kids are in those lower classes, they are always going to be in those lower classes because they don't have the opportunity to show what they know within the other classes. And most of the classes in our high school are semester long. And so they have to pass that, and then they just go on to the next one. So like Algebra 1 will go to Algebra 2. Whereas some of the other kids can skip the algebra because they've passed it in middle school and go on to the calculus or pre-calc or trigonometry. So I think that does put a label on kids, and that kind of puts them into that tracking term. I wish there was a right answer because obviously we need to meet the needs of these students, but I think part of the reason for these oncoming career academies are that kids will be able to take those courses, but then maybe go into more of their interest and the more opportunities to show what they know based on what they like. So I think that's why high schools are getting away from just the normal day-to-day classrooms and going into their career academies so that kids can start in high school taking classes with what they like and what they are interested in and what they will succeed in outside of high school, whether it be going to a 2-year school, going to a training, going to a 4-year school, but the kids can really start to get that in high school and aren't necessarily labeled the low, medium, and high. But I think we will always have to deal with the tracking and ability grouping in education, and I don't see a way around it, especially in the elementary grades. I think they're trying to do that with the Career Academy, like I said, in the high school. But I think it's hard for teachers to be able to teach and meet the needs of every student without having to group them in some form within the classroom, especially in the elementary school.